Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Well, Tom, we are continuing to do our podcast remotely. I am still in the Midwest getting ready for our event. Before we talk about it, though, I had an observation the other day that I kind of wanted to get into a little bit, and that is,
sure,
we talk a lot about the downsides of the 24-hour news cycle and some of the problems with the media trying to create news that's interesting enough to keep an audience and rehashing the same things over and over and over again and hearing from a million different people what they think about the same topic. I think it's become even worse with things like Twitter, because instead of a show trying to cover everything in an hour and then going on to the next show that's going to cover the same topics, something like Twitter has to just keep going every second of every day and get this information. But something has come to my attention. I think that is somewhat of a recent phenomenon, although you can correct me if you think I'm missing something. And that is, because of the 24-hour news cycle, we seem to be gravitating towards people and then abandoning them just as quickly, right? The cycle has affected the way that we feel about people who are in the public eye.
And the most holding someone up, right? Here's the hero of the moment, yay! And then 2 seconds later, boo, we hate you.
Right, exactly right. And I mean, I think the one of the biggest opportunities we can look at one of the biggest piece of evidence we can see of this is President Trump was on stage just a few days ago. I don't even know where he was. They're starting to live stream. He's starting to do his rallies again. He's starting to prepare for the 2024 election cycle. I think it's pretty much a given that he is running at this point. He's not even denying it anymore.
I was just going to ask, Dave, do you think he's going to run for president?
He doesn't even seem to be denying it anymore. He doesn't even seem to be saying, well, we'll see. He's saying, I'm gearing up. I'm getting my team ready to go. But he hasn't announced anything yet, obviously, because as soon as you do, you start having all of these rules and regulations that the government sets in place to make it favorable for the incumbent. Which
no, to keep us safe, Dave. It's to keep us safe.
I'm sorry. It has nothing to do with so that the progressives can keep their continuance of government power and everything else. Well, I feel safer now. So thank you for informing me of that. So Trump has been a fairly vocal proponent of Elon Musk over the last several weeks, right? We've been hearing a lot out of Elon Musk, and people have at least felt like, okay, he's starting to move towards the more freedom-oriented, conservative-oriented side of the conversation. I have pointed out that I don't really agree that Twitter is necessarily dealing with a freedom of speech issue as much as they're just dealing with a poor treatment of their customer issue. But you and I generally agree that as a private business, Twitter can do whatever they want. We should be able to move away from it. And it's when a business starts collaborating with others to exclude people and make sure the market shuts you out entirely, and the government starts putting regulations in place that prevent competition from starting up, that's when we have a problem. But Twitter or Musk recently has announced that he is not following through on his purchase of Twitter. He has decided that the information that they had filed with the SEC was inaccurate, was improper, that there were more bots, there were more what has been titled UPCs or CPGs.
I love these acronyms.
CGP. This was a tough one. It's a video game term, and I'm not a video game guy necessarily, but video games, a CPG is a computer-generated player. A CGP, computer-generated player. So these bots are essentially the same as if you think back to any video game that was a one-player game in the past. You had all of these other characters who were doing things. They were programmed to do certain things to interact with in the game. That's what these bots actually are. So people, I think a lot of times don't totally understand what a bot necessarily is on Twitter or on any of these social platforms. It's like a video game manufacturer. They're generating these characters who are designed to interact with you based on different things that you do. Right. So let's take a football video game for a second. If you're controlling the wide receiver and you're running left, the computer generated player is supposed to follow you to the left, right? If he's the cornerback, right? It's designed to react to whatever you do. And so these aren't just bots that are out there. We're going to send out 1 million bots to go post this one thing. We're going to see what you're doing, and we're generating a sort of artificial intelligence that's going to allow it to respond to you accordingly.
Well, so, Dave, I want to interrupt real quick to just share with our listeners where my mind goes as I'm listening to you describe this. I'm sitting here wondering, so what happens when they program these bots with artificial intelligence and these bots come out and identify as real human beings?
Do they have rights?
Yeah, do they have rights? What exactly does it mean? And also, there was a great visual representation of this whole concept in the trilogy of the Matrix movies, right? When they're in the Matrix, everyone else that you see are these computer generated, right? They're computer programs. They're not actually real human beings.
It makes you think of the woman in the red dress. Do you remember that scene?
Oh yeah.
The woman in the red dress, and the guy who coded it was so proud of his creation of the woman in the red dress. And Neo comes out and he says, "What did you think of her?" And he's like, "Who?" He says, "The woman in the red dress." And you could see the pride in his face that he created this computer generated player. Anyway, Twitter, according to Musk, and I think most of us would probably agree, Twitter has a problem of too many bots or too many computer-generated players. They have been reporting in their filings to the SEC that there is about 5% of their user base are these bots. Musk believes it's closer to 20%. Now, if the value of Twitter is based on the number of users on its platform, a bot is not capable of going and making a purchase off of an advertisement. So that does nothing for you. If you and I went on there, right, we're trying to promote this event in Nashville. And if we went out and we spent money on Twitter advertising this event, and they said, "Oh, we put it in front of 1 million people, but 200,000 of those were bots," then all of a sudden we just paid for advertising to 200,000 people, quote unquote, who aren't actually capable of buying a ticket and coming to our event. So Musk pushed back. He says, I want to see the code. I want to see your database. I want to know how many bots you actually have. And Twitter says, nope, you agreed to a price and you need to buy it at this price no matter what. So now they're going back and forth, and Musk has said, fine, if you're not going to show me, I'm not going to buy it. Now, Trump had thought, okay, Elon Musk is going to allow me back on Twitter if he buys it. So I'm gonna play Musk up. I'm gonna promote Musk. I like Musk. I'm gonna be friendly to him. As soon as Musk is no longer gonna own Twitter, Trump immediately the other night starts going right back after him. You know, that Elon Musk, we all really liked him. We had high hopes for him, but he's no good. He even lied to me. And Trump goes on to talk about how Musk looked him in the eye and said, I voted for you in 2020. And then just a few weeks ago during the primaries, Musk said, I voted Republican for the first time ever during this primary. So which one is it? And Trump starts calling him out for all of this. The same thing similarly happened with Dave Portnoy. And I think I've talked about Barstool Sports on the podcast quite a bit. I'm a real big fan of the business itself, of how it's grown, of what he has been able to do. He's been able to sell his business 3 times. The first 2 times he sold it at a peak. The person who bought it was incapable of running it at the level he did. So what did he do? He bought it back for pennies on what he sold it for, rebuilt it back up and sold it again. And he's made a lot of money. And then all of a sudden, just a few weeks ago, we had the Dobbs decision come down and Roe gets overturned. And all of a sudden, Dave Portnoy goes on Instagram and says, emergency press conference. That's his favorite term. Emergency press conference. Like we all need to hear what Dave Portnoy thinks. And Dave Portnoy came on and said, this is a horrible decision. And if this is actually the right constitutional decision, if the justices actually decided what is constitutional, then maybe we need to rethink what our Constitution says. And those founders, they owned slaves, so they didn't do everything right. Maybe we're holding them up to a standard that we shouldn't be in. And he goes on this rant, and all of us are sitting there just thinking, man, like, be consistent. If you're going to side on something, if you're going to say something, understand what you're talking about. Now, what I think we're seeing with all of these examples, and there's been plenty more recently, you're seeing so many people who like to appeal to the freedom audience, to the conservative audience, to the constitutional, those who believe in the Constitution, and they say a lot of the right things. They never actually take the time to understand them. And when they never actually take the time to understand them, inevitably, they're going to deviate from the principles because they're going to get over emotional. And it all goes back to that foundational idea of Aristotle, that the law, that the Constitution is reason free from passion, reason free from emotion. And all of these guys in the same way, whether it's Musk, whether it's to a certain extent Trump, and I've said this plenty of times before. Look, I support a lot of the things that Donald Trump did. I think Donald Trump was significantly better than a number of his predecessors from an understanding of freedom. But there's also moments where he's gone and pumped somebody up like Musk originally because he thought, well, I can rely on this guy, when that guy didn't actually understand his principles. And then all of a sudden he fails to live up to what our expectations are.
Well, there's several things there that come to mind. First off, I think there's a pretty deep narcissistic trend in all of us, in all human beings. I mean, most of us, what's the favorite thing we like to think about and talk about? Ourselves. It's the thing we're the most familiar with. I mean, that's very natural. I'm not saying it's good or desirable or admirable. It's just very natural. And so it's interesting when you see this in this case with Trump and Musk, when Musk is talking about the importance of free speech, at least in the context of Twitter, right? One particular social media platform. He was talking about the purpose of freedom, not banning people and censoring people and just letting people say what they want to say. Number one, I would say chances are high Elon Musk didn't really think through that principle of free speech and what it means and how to apply that principle consistently in different situations. And number two, notice how quickly Donald Trump made it about him, Trump. Oh, Musk. It wasn't, yay, Musk is standing for this abstract, timeless principle, free speech. It was, well, Musk is good because he's going to let me, Donald Trump, back onto this platform. And then the moment it appears like, well, I guess he isn't going to let me on because he's not going to buy it. Well, to hell with him. I don't want anything else to do with him.
Such a good point.
And there's another couple of other thoughts I had on what you were saying here. In this constant 24-hour news cycle where we have to come up with news, have to come up with things for people to talk about and tweet about and post about and put memes about all the time. It is really easy to make things about other people. We talk about other people and their status as hero or villain, right? Just goes up and down and up and down. And I wanted to point out someone who avoided that pitfall very well. I don't know that he did it perfectly, but unusually well, was Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh, whether you hate him or love him, and then there are probably just as many people who hate him, maybe more, I don't know, who loved him. He certainly, there is no denying he did something unusual. He was a trailblazer. He went on radio the moment that kind of platform of talk radio was possible. Congress repealed some obnoxious laws in the late 1980s, and radio stations could do that. And he built this enormous, unmatched, unprecedented following on radio. And what was interesting about Rush is he was not a big cheerleader of people. I'm not saying he would never give anyone credit or say good things, but he was always trying to direct his audience to principles, to history, to the lessons to be learned from the American founding. He would go and write books on these kinds of subjects, right, to teach it to others. And he would say this very often, don't invest everything you have, all of your loyalty and support and emotional energy into a candidate or a person, because in the end, they're people. They're people. And even if someone is saying something today that you like, they might say or do something you don't like, tomorrow. Who knows? And, it's interesting, Dave, we talk about these things, and a lot of people listening to this conversation think, yeah, this is the way the world is today because of technology and all these platforms. And it turns out, in decisive respects, not much has changed. There's a section in the middle of the Federalist Papers where Madison he's actually warning against the idea of mobs and how fickle they are. A mob might hold up in praise the very same person that the next day they're going to attack and maybe even murder. I mean, mobs are very fickle. And Madison uses as a world famous example, Socrates. How fickle was the Athenian mob who one day executed him, made him drink hemlock, put him to death, and then turned around the next day and built statues honoring him. This is the father of philosophy, right? And so that kind of fickleness, that kind of, we love you, we hate you, we love you, we hate you. It's a pretty natural human phenomenon. Again, it's not admirable. I'm not encouraging it. I'm just saying it's deeply woven into human nature. And in a way, it's what made the project of the founders so difficult. It's what makes our project today, trying to save some semblance of a self-governing constitutional republic today. What makes it so challenging is we're trying to get growing numbers of Americans to pay attention to certain principles, certain basic ideas, certain precepts, certain virtues, not so much of paying attention to which celebrity, whether it's a political celebrity or a Hollywood celebrity or a sports celebrity, pay less attention to which celebrity is being praised or shamed today, and pay more attention to these principles, because it's the principles, knowing them and acting according to them, incorporating those principles into our choices. That's how we're going to preserve constitutional self-government, not by giving awards and hitting the like button or the dislike button, for a bunch of popular people.
You talk about how it's not new, right? We do think about things in terms of technology and how advanced the world has become and everything else, and how much we've grown, and that maybe we need to, you hear the left all the time saying, well, this gun isn't what they had then, or the internet isn't what the internet presents communication challenges the founders couldn't possibly fathom, and therefore does the Constitution really apply anymore? And that's the excuse that the 1619 Project and AOC and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and that whole side like to argue, unless they think the Constitution or they can manipulate the interpretation of the Constitution to agree with them, right? We just heard Kamala talk on one of the TV shows about, the interviewer asked her why did they wait 49 years instead of trying to pass a law to make Roe, to codify Roe into law? Why did they just let the court be the determining factor, knowing that a court could always overturn it in the future? And her answer was, well, because we just thought certain things were settled. So when they think something is settled, and it's on their side, that they're very happy to say, oh, this is constitutional, or this is that. It's only when it goes against their idea of progress, what they believe is progressive, that they start to push back. And you started talking about tech. Go ahead.
Well, Dave, I just wanted to point out a quick counterexample to that. If we go back to the administration of Abraham Lincoln, so Lincoln famously issues his Emancipation Proclamation in the course of the war. He thinks it is fully justified, it's fully constitutional, because he attributes it to his constitutional powers as commander-in-chief during a time of actual war. We have armies attacking the United States, and yet he also realizes it's not permanent. The Emancipation Proclamation has the status of an executive order. The next person elected president could easily cancel it, repeal it, issue the opposite kind of executive order. And so he wants to make that more permanent. And he writes about this, he talks about this. He doesn't even want a law because he knows that a law can be overturned, repealed very easily. He wants a constitutional amendment, in big part because he doesn't trust the courts. He saw what the Supreme Court did with the Dred Scott case. It handed down this disastrous opinion that, very similar to Roe, what the court did in Dred Scott is it told Americans, you have a constitutional right to own slaves. Now, that's not true. The Constitution nowhere says anybody has a constitutional right to own slaves, but the Supreme Court pronounced that, and millions of Southerners said, well, if the court said I have a constitutional right to own slaves, then by golly, I do. And so Lincoln wants to do something that is higher than a court opinion, and the solution is a constitutional amendment. Amend the Constitution abolishing slavery, and that trumps anything the court does. Advocates for Roe v. Wade, you're right. They had half of a century to do the same kind of thing, and they didn't think that was important.
Well, and you talk about the justices and the Supreme Court justices and Lincoln knowing that what they had just done in Dred Scott. Talk about another group that we are fickle about, right? There was a time where, and I don't trust the court. Right. John Roberts voted what I believe is the correct way on Dobbs, but John Roberts certainly hasn't been a reliable justice on the court to uphold the Constitution of the United States. He has certainly let emotion and personal interest get in his way of making constitutional decisions repeatedly throughout his time on the bench, and so have several others. And we have a long history of the court making decisions that are highly suspect and questionable. Right now, most people who are conservatives, people who identify in that way, are sitting there saying, look how great the Supreme Court is. We have to uphold the Supreme Court, protect the court, all of these things. When the reality is I don't trust the court. And conservatives need to be careful to not prop people up. And I think that was part of the point that I failed to make earlier, whether it was about Musk or Portnoy or anybody else. We tend to, as soon as we hear somebody that we like, we tend to start propping them up. I've been talking a lot with friends recently about Dan Crenshaw, the congressman from Texas, with the eye patch, I'm talking about. Dan Crenshaw, when he first came on the scene, he's Harvard educated. He's very well spoken. He's got a strong military background. He seems very well educated. And people immediately jump to Dan Crenshaw should be the next candidate for president of the United States on the Republican ticket. And then what did Dan Crenshaw do? He went and supported red flag laws. And immediately everybody says, now I feel betrayed. And it's because we are so fickle and we are so quick to, hey, wait, he agrees with us. Let's go after him. Let's get him. Let's prop him up, that we don't let people build. We don't let people prove themselves, and let's see people over time, see what they actually are. And when somebody shows you who they are, believe them.
I'm gonna draw upon Lincoln here a little bit. In one of his speeches, that's one of my favorites. It's a long speech. It might be the longest speech he ever gave. It's in 1854. This is sort of the context here is the United States Congress had just passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was led by Stephen A. Douglas, and it basically opened up all the Western territories to slavery. An earlier law had prohibited slavery out there, and the Kansas-Nebraska opened it up. And this really reignites a political interest in Lincoln. And he gives this long speech in Peoria. Sometimes it's just called the Peoria speech in 1854. And all the major themes of the rest of his career, they're all in there. The major elements that he will draw upon in his famous debates with Douglas 4 years later, they're in that speech. The themes of the Gettysburg Address, are in that speech. It's wonderful. And one of the things he says in his Peoria speech, he's very, Lincoln is a political animal. He pays attention to politics. He knows who wins, who loses, why. I mean, he has his fingers on the pulse of practical politics. And he understands as well as anybody the necessity to build coalitions. You have to. If you're going to win, you got to build coalitions. And coalitions aren't going to agree on everything all the time. And Lincoln says in that speech, stand with a man while he stands right and in the ways that he stands right, and part with him when he goes wrong. Mm-hmm. So his point is, right, if you and I, Dave, agree on a certain thing, let's be allies, let's be friends together on that thing. But that doesn't mean either of us should say, right, I shouldn't go out and say, I support everything Dave Rich will ever do for the rest of his life, because I might not, right? I might, and you might not agree with something I do later. But what we can say is, on this thing right here, right now, we agree on this, and we're going to support each other, and we encourage others to come, rather than this kind of it almost reminds me of a sort of primitive religiosity, like looking for some kind of savior or saint or idol, right, to praise and worship. So we turn to the person and we say, oh, that like Congressman Crenshaw, right? We're just going to love everything that he says and does. Well, that's a foolish thing to do, because we're talking about human beings.
It's such an important point, and I bring that back to President Trump. And you just heard it from me, right? Every time I say anything mildly negative about him, I feel this need to qualify it with, I don't disagree with everything President Trump says. I actually agree with a lot of what he says. I think he is a significantly better president than most of the presidents of the 100 years before him. He did a better job than most over the last 100 years. And yet every time I make a slight criticism of him, I feel like I have to preface it with that, because I don't want people to think that, oh, you're just a never Trumper and you don't like President Trump, or vice versa, right? If I praise him, I feel the same need to qualify it as, I don't agree with everything he does, but I think Trump did this really, really well. It is that need, because we have become the society that you're either all in on somebody or you're all out on somebody. And it's so hard to have that I'm gonna side with him when he's right, and I'm gonna criticize him when he's wrong.
Isn't it fascinating how many people in our modern progressive world, with all kinds of new technologies that didn't used to exist, we tend to pride ourselves on being very educated, very smart, knowing things, knowing how to do things, having machines that no one has ever had before. And yet, at the same time, we've kind of boiled everything down to a ridiculous level of simplicity of everything's either all black, all white, all one way or all the other way. And you're absolutely right. It goes both ways. If you say, I've had this conversation, I'll say, I kind of liked when Trump really identified the swamp as a problem. He wanted to push back against the bureaucracy. Now, he's limited in what he can do as president, but he was voicing that concern to the American people, and I thought that was good. And I've had progressives look at me right in the face and say, oh, so you're for mocking crippled journalists?
Yep.
Because he made that, he was making fun of some journalist who has some physical disability. And there it is, right? It's easy. So if you say, I agree with him on this one thing, what others hear is, oh, you agree with him on everything. You support everything he ever said, right? And then I'm in this position, I have to start pointing out the most basic elementary things that a grade school kid should understand. No, I didn't say I agree with everything. I said I agree with that thing. I wish more public and political people would do that. And the same thing on the other side. If I point out something true, Trump was a big spender. I wish he didn't sign so many spending bills. And the minute I say that, then Trump supporters go, oh, so you hate Trump. You hate Trump. You're a never Trumper, right? It's like, no, I have to have the same, basic conversation that I would have with tiny little kids, because people want to make it so much, all one, all the other. We seem to be really bad, we modern Americans, at being nuanced in any way.
Well, you could say the same thing about Dobbs too, right? I mean, Dave Portnoy had to immediately go from, you like the Dobbs decision, so therefore you don't believe in women's rights and the Constitution, the founders were terrible people and all of these things, when instead of saying, hey, we just overturned Roe, I don't know that that was the right decision. Can we discuss the nuances of what made Roe? I mean, Roe in and of itself was a terrible Supreme Court decision, right? It was a bad legal decision. If you want to make a good legal argument in favor of abortion being legal, then make that argument and let's have a conversation about it. Or if you think that that's the way to go convince enough people to pass a constitutional amendment that says we're going to protect the ability to have abortions. I'm not going to call it a right because it's not a right. But we're going to protect the ability to have abortions in this country. And if you're not capable of convincing enough people to pass a constitutional amendment for that, then you lose. Now, I want to take a step back because you've said something twice and I keep trying to go back to it and then I get sidetracked onto something else. But you talked about technology and how we keep moving forward in technology. And we talk about today how people say, well, modern technology, that the founders couldn't have possibly known that then. And we think that we are so far advanced. And I think back to our case study this month. And I have told this to you. You put this in the case study and I had forgotten this quote, and I love this quote. I posted on LinkedIn on 4th of July. I want to read the Calvin Coolidge quote from the 150th anniversary of, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to just give a little context there. So, and you said this is the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, Coolidge is president at the time. So the Declaration, of course, was passed, ratified on July 4th, 1776. So this is 150 years later. This is 1926. And the president of the United States is Calvin Coolidge. And it's an interesting coincidence, that anniversary with his presidential administration, because in the modern period, certainly in between Lincoln and Reagan, I would argue there's not been a president who studied the founding, who was a student of the founders more so than Calvin Coolidge. So he was absolutely the right person to talk about the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Right. I agree with you completely on where he is on that thread and between Lincoln and Reagan. And this quote, I want everybody to pay specific attention to the first paragraph when we talk about technology, because it's just so revealing of, you talk about us being so focused on wanting to talk about ourselves. It also shows how focused we are on, we think our time is so different than all other times. And really the truth stays constant and human nature stays constant. And that's proof of this. So he writes, about the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. I mean, that right there, before I even read any more of this, that right there is the exact same argument that AOC or Dianne Feinstein or Elizabeth Warren, they're all making today. They say, how could you possibly relate anything in 1776 to today? They couldn't possibly have known what life was going to be like. People were making that same argument in 1926, and Calvin Coolidge was pushing back on it then.
Well, and I want to point out before you continue, here's what makes this subject both fascinating and challenging, right? In a certain way, in a certain realm, it's right. We have had new experiences. We have created new things that didn't used to work. And some of the things we've created work better than what I personally would rather sail the ocean in a ship built in 1926, right, than in 1776. We got better at building ships. We didn't even know how to build automobiles in 1776. We knew how to build automobiles in 1926. So in that realm, and I want to say a little more after you finish about this whole notion of technology, what it is. We have created new devices, new machineries, new things. That has changed, but there's also some fundamental moral and political things that never change. That changes in technology cannot affect, and that's what Coolidge is going to talk about.
So I'm gonna reassert a couple of parts of what that first paragraph was. He said it is often asserted, so it's often spoken about by mostly progressives. It is often asserted that we may very well discard their conclusions, the founders' conservatives, for something more modern. Then he goes on to say, but that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter, meaning the Declaration of Independence. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of we the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern but more ancient than those of the Revolutionary Fathers. I think that I love the quote. I mean, it gives me chills, and his point is so perfect, right? You cannot, just because things change, it doesn't make the truths of equality, the truths of justice, the truths of the American founding and of the Declaration any less true. It doesn't make them any less applicable just because technology has improved. And we like to talk about those things. We like to talk about we hear all the time, it's asserted the same way it was in 1926. It's asserted that we've made great progress since then, and those ideas can't be applied anymore. And he right then and there says, yeah, they were making that argument 100 years ago. 150 years after the founding, they were making that same argument 100 years ago. They were not true then, and they're not true now.
Yeah, I love the fact that he uses the term progress a couple of times just in that short little span there, because he's aware. Calvin Coolidge is very, very much aware that progress, that term, that concept, that is the new label. It's the new disguise for overturning, destroying our constitutional republic. It's going to be done in the name of progress. And the people who destroy the Constitution are going to call it progress as they do that work. But, I want to put this, this is something I love to do. I love to distill things down to really simple, basic examples. And I think I can do it here in this case. As the Declaration rightly says, I, Tom Krennewitter, I have no rightful claim to your property, Dave, to any of your rights. I don't have a rightful claim to your speech, to your labor, to your property, nothing. That's what belongs to you, and what belongs to me, belongs to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't change whether I wash my dishes by hand or I wash my dishes with a brand new dishwasher, right? There's a change in technology. People used to wash their dishes by hand. Now they use, computerized dishwashers. There's progress in technology, but that doesn't mean I now have a right to come take your stuff, right? It doesn't change the relationship between human beings. You still have your natural rights. I have my natural rights. And any change in technology doesn't affect those kinds of things. That is a very difficult concept for a lot of modern Americans to get their mind around the idea that technology can change. It does change. It always has changed. We've been inventing things for thousands of years, but that doesn't affect the fundamental moral and political precepts, those self-evident truths that were enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. And it's worth mentioning, those self-evident truths were true long before 1776. I mean, it was good that they were enshrined in the Declaration, but that's not what makes them true. They're intrinsically true. They've always been true. and it was a good thing that they were in there. That word, I like to remind people there, it's actually that word technology. It's two Greek roots combined. Techne is an ancient Greek word that meant making things. It meant a craft, an art. Is usually how it's translated, but not art as in the aesthetics of throwing paint on a wall and saying that's an expression of my feelings. The older understanding of the art of making or building something, right? Like you might, as an apprentice, you might go study with a blacksmith to learn the art of blacksmithing, right? Like how to take iron and heat it up and bang on it and bend it and shape it and mold it into the things that are useful that you want. That's an art, that's a craft. It's making something. Techne, it means making something. And then logos is the logic, the technology means knowledge. It means to study, to know certain things. So technology literally means knowledge of making things, how to make something. And of course, what we want to make are things that are useful. That's what we tend to focus our energy and our capital on. But technology itself, the art of this, the knowledge of making things, isn't the same as knowledge of first things, of knowledge of permanent things, knowledge of timeless principles that tell us how we should treat other people and what belongs to other people. It's a separate realm, which is one of the reasons in one of really the mother of all philosophy books, Plato's Republic, there's a lengthy discussion in there how the art, making, doing things, the craft of a thief is the same craft, the same art as the safekeeper, right? The person who wants to make a safe to protect things, what do they study? They study the same science, the same technology as the thief, right? Because the safekeeper wants to make a safe to keep thieves out, and the thief wants to figure out a way to break into the safe, right? They're studying the same thing. Technology in that sense is amoral, apolitical. It doesn't, technology in itself doesn't tell us what we ought to do. It doesn't tell us what is right or what is wrong. We can design a technology that can blow up an entire city, right? We can make a nuclear warhead, or some people know how to make nuclear warheads. I don't know how to make them. Some people do. But that doesn't answer the question, should we blow up that city? Is it right or is it wrong to blow up that city? That's going to require a knowledge of moral principles, first principles, that is not part of the study of technology.
You know, it's interesting because when you talk about it from a knowledge of making things, it's something I've explored throughout my life. This is something that came from my father. I understand things a lot better when I understand the why or the purpose, right? So if you're talking about, I'll give you the best example. You and I have both talked about this in the past. We both come from car families, from automotive families. My father loved to sit and work on cars, and I would sit as a young child all the way up till today, learning how to work on engines and things like that. And for most of my life as a child, I would watch him and he would tell me, okay, see that bolt over there and that casing on that little piece on that engine, go take that off, or go put that on, or go take that apart. And I would just do it because he told me to. I never understood the why. And I didn't understand an engine until he explained to me and taught me how an engine actually creates propulsion, right? Until I actually understood the entire process. And like you, he liked to make things very simple, and he taught me that essentially an engine is a lung. It's trying to breathe, and it's bringing air in, and it's using the air, and it's pushing air out, and that's what makes an engine go. And as we broke that down a little bit further, I started to understand it, and I started to understand why different parts went in different places and were necessary. That is what Dave, technology is.
Hey, Dave, on that score, I would be remiss if I didn't offer. So in my typical Cranwood way, I have distilled down the 4 strokes of an internal combustion engine: suck, squeeze, burn, blow. That is something all my kids have memorized. That, right? Suck, squeeze, burn, blow. The first stroke sucks in the fuel air mixture. The second stroke squeezes it, compresses it. Then there's a little spark, right? And it burns and it pushes that piston down. And then finally blows all the exhaust out. And it does that over and over and over.
Over and over again. So
suck, squeeze, burn, blow. I want to hear from our members. How many of them will pass that on to their own kids? Suck, squeeze, burn, blow.
But you should understand what that means. And that's what technology is, right? When you understand fundamentally, when you understand how something works, that gives you the ability to improve on it, to make it more efficient, to make it more effective, to make it better. And the entire idea of technology in its simplest form is to continually improve on things or create new things to improve on an existing problem, right? We've talked many times on the podcast about Henry Ford. Henry Ford was facing it wasn't just Ford. I mean, obviously there were a lot of car manufacturers, and you had Daimler at the time in Germany and all these other people. But there's the old quote attributed to Ford that we never really knew if he actually said or not. If I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. The reality is we had a poop problem in the streets, and somebody had to address that. And we also had a speed problem. We had a problem of we're trying to get from point A to point B. And how do we do that more effectively, more efficiently, more quickly, and do it without the problem of more poop from more horses? So
I want to make sure people aren't just dismissing what you're saying. What happens in the second half of the 19th century, and especially after the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution really takes off. And part of what that means is we see the creation of big factories, big manufacturing and production facilities, which leads to the growth of cities, really big cities. The United States, in the early years of our republic, we were a nation of farmers. Most people lived scattered apart. There were a few urban areas, but even New York City and Philadelphia, they weren't that large at the time of the founding. By the late 1900s, or late 1800s, late 19th century, we had multiple cities, over 1 million people. And these people all lived pretty close to each other. And with 1 million people, that means a lot of horses, thousands and thousands of horses, and horses poop a lot. And when you have thousands of horses within a few square miles, there were mounds of horsemen. They couldn't get rid of it. They didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, it was, we sort of laugh about it. It was a serious health problem. It was attracting mosquitoes, right? And people were getting dysentery, getting in the water supply. I mean, it was terrible. And we needed a solution. And along comes Henry Ford and says, I got an idea. How about a horseless carriage? A carriage that can take us places that doesn't require any poop at all.
And really what Henry Ford did, just so we're being honest about it wasn't that he invented the horseless carriage. What Henry Ford did was he said, look, there's this thing, there are these horseless carriages starting to pop up around the world, but we can't really manufacture very many of them. So most people are going to still ride horses, but a few people are going to get to these horseless carriages. I'm going to figure out how to make sure the masses can get them so that we can get horses off of the street. And that's what he ended up doing. So we have Henry Ford accomplishing that. That's technology. Technology is identifying a problem and making it better. You're right. It is apolitical. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have anything else. And universal natural rights, human truths that we talk about in the Declaration of Independence, they don't change based on those, even if that technology creates greater danger, right? Those truths don't change regardless of whether or not technology creates something that's more dangerous, right? You don't have less of a right to your own life, liberty, and property because a car has the potential of killing you more easily than a horse does, right? That didn't change. So there's also no reason that we went from muskets to AR-15s. That doesn't mean that your rights change. It doesn't mean that the rights stay the same. Your right to life, your right to your pursuit of happiness still exists in the exact same way. There is no progress to be made on that, despite the changes in those technologies.
In fact, if I was part of these conversations, if there was an AOC or an Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders in the room, and I was there, I would reframe the discussion rather than talking about what kind of weapons did the Americans have during the Revolution versus what kind of weapons they have now. I would frame it this way. I'd say, are human beings a threat to other human beings? And of course, the answer is yeah, sure. Has that always been true? Yeah, it's always. Human beings were a threat to human beings 200 years ago. They still are today. They will be in the future. What about those human beings in government? Are they a threat? Oh yeah, they're not just a threat. They're a special threat. They're a special threat because they have the legalized force of government at their disposal. They're especially dangerous. They're more dangerous than anyone else. Has the change in military technology or weapons or guns or anything, has that changed that fact? No, it has not changed that fact. If anything, those in government are even more dangerous than ever, which means in a way you could say our constitutional limits on government power are as important, arguably more important today than ever before. Our changes in technology has not removed the danger of government to our own safety, to our own liberty. It hasn't changed the threat of other human beings, including those other human beings in government. That's one of those timeless truths that never changes. Those in government are always a threat, always a potential danger to those they govern.
Absolutely. I'm going to also flip this on its head a little bit and pose this a similar statement that new technology cannot create new rights that didn't exist before, right? Rights exist as truths forever. They were true before they were discovered. They're discoverable, right? That's what we talk about all the time, that rights are discoverable. They were true before they were discovered. They were true the day they were discovered. They're true when billions of people know them, and they don't change over time.
Dave, that can't be right what you just said, because how did people have a right to transgender sex changes 300 years ago?
That's my point. You can't, just because you create something new, and I wasn't going to go down that road even, but just because you create something new, the automobile, right? There wasn't a right to transportation. There wasn't a right that you had a right for easy access to get from point A to point B when cars didn't exist, or before horses, when people knew how to tame horses and people were still learning how to tame horses. You didn't have a right to a horse. So why should you have a right to a car? Why should you have a right to transportation? If you want to provide transportation, then make an argument and figure out a private market way of fulfilling that need, because you've identified a need in the marketplace. But just because we've created new technology that makes life easier or makes life better for some people, that's the point of technology. The point of technology is to understand how something works or what is a need and go create something better.
You're absolutely right, because in the end, technology is a synonym for labor. Any technology we talk about, whether it's a computer, a car, anything, an airplane, that is somebody's labor. Somebody spent time, capital, energy, figuring that out, discovering it, inventing it, improving it. I didn't figure out how to make airplanes or how to make cars or computers. I figured out none of those things. And so to say that I have a right to a computer or a right to a car is the same thing as saying I have a right to the labor of those people who made those. And I don't. The only labor I have a right to is my own labor. I have a right to use my labor how I want to. I don't have the right to anybody else's labor. If somebody else makes a car or a computer and I'm sitting there looking at it, I think I value that. I'd really like to have that. Then what I'm free to do is work and create some wealth and offer a trade. And even then, that person doesn't have to trade with me. If they don't want to trade with me, if they don't like me, if they say, "Hey, Tom, you're just a stinky old kraut, go away. I don't want to trade with you." Well, then I don't get to trade, right? I don't have a rightful claim to what somebody else's have. And you're absolutely right. We have a nation of tens of millions of Americans who think every new advance in technology is an expansion in their own rights. They think that they have a right to this to whatever new technology comes along? And the answer is no, you don't have any of these. You don't have a right to new technology because you don't have the right to someone else's property, somebody else's labor. And on this point, the American founders were perfectly clear. They were perfectly clear on this, and they were correct about this. They set forth these timeless, permanent, in the Declaration, they're called unalienable rights because they can't be alienated from you. They can't be taken from you. You have a rightful claim to your property. You, Dave, have a rightful claim to your life, and I can't take that claim away from you, right? Even if I kill you, even if I take your life, what I did is wrong precisely because you have a rightful claim to your life, right? Yes. I didn't take the claim away from you. I cannot, no human being can transform another human being into a natural slave. Maybe we can pass laws, and by law, we can make someone into a legal slave. We can have laws that declare someone a slave, but then those laws are wrong. Those laws are mistaken, right? That's not what somebody else is. Because to separate the rightful claim to one's own life and liberty and property, to separate that from a human being would be to transform that human being into a kind of natural slave, right? Someone that, or a beast, something that has no rightful claim to itself. And we can't do that. And the founders understood this with perfect clarity. His greatest students, Abraham Lincoln, Calvin Coolidge, Ronald Reagan, those great students of the founders, they understood this. And in a way, recovering these basic concepts, this idea of unalienable rights, individual natural rights, this is the greatest work that we have in front of us. This is the greatest challenge we have. There is a machinery, and I use that imagery quite purposeful. There is a gigantic machinery of progressivism that is eroding away at that idea of natural rights, at the constitutional foundation that was constructed to protect those rights. It's like a big machine just eroding, and it's been doing its work now for decades. It's been doing its work for over a century. And in fact, progressives have pressed down on the accelerator. That machinery is going faster. It's not slowing down. It's not like they're done. They want to discredit and diminish and ultimately destroy everything connected to the founding for a very political reason. I mean, when you think about it, right? Progressives have taken over. They've certainly taken over the world of education. They took over the universities, the colleges, many decades ago, and that has trickled down to elementary schools, K through 12 education. They have taken over Hollywood. They have taken over corporate boardrooms. I mean, really, they've taken over many churches of all different denominations. I mean, progressives have taken over most of the centers of cultural influence in America. So that raises the question, why do they keep attacking the founding? Why do they create things like the 1619 Project to say America's all about slavery, and the founders are all a bunch of racists, and they want to change the date, for goodness sake, of what the founding was? Why? What's behind all this? It's a political agenda. They want to remove constitutional constraints from government. They want to shape the government to do what they want it to do. They want the government to do many unconstitutional things, and they want the government to stop doing the few constitutional things it's supposed to do. And the way to do that is to discredit and remove the Constitution. And they are going to achieve that, they think, by discrediting the founding as a whole and the founders, and say, see, they were stupid. They lived in a backwards world that's not relevant to our world of technology. And they were a bunch of racists and sexists and homophobes. They were morally repulsive. And that's their ultimate agenda. And so the question is, for those of us who want to protect what little remains of constitutional self-government here in the United States, what tools do we have? How do we fend off? How do we refute? How do we defeat that big machinery of progressivism? The answer are those ideas, those principles of the founding, recovering, rediscovering what America is, what it was founded to be. Yes. Very literally, the future, the fate of constitutional self-government in America depends on that rediscovery, that recovery. And that's the theme. That's the theme of our work at the Vino and Veritas Society. And that is going to be the theme of a very unusual kind of show that we're going to do at the end of July 28th, when we're going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. And we haven't really talked about this, but I'll spill the beans a little bit. I mean, look, our hope is that this event is such a smashing success that it becomes the first in a long line. We would love to do this all over the country if we can make this work. So I want to make sure that before we wrap up today, people know about it. If you're a member of the Vino and Veritas Society, even if you haven't been listening to the podcast, but you're chiming in now, July 28th, you just go to our website, vinoandveritassociety.com, and then add a /events. It'll take you right to a page that has all the details that people need to know, including tickets and all that sort of thing. It's going to be a great event. Dr. Ben Carson is going to be on stage with us, which is a great honor, and he's going to make the show even better. There's going to be fun food. There's going to be there'll be libations. There'll be some vino there and some other fun drinks, and it's going to be just a great high energy, lively event with a lot of like-minded people. And so I want to ask everybody who's listening, please come if you can, and share information about that event with your friends, family, anybody you think might be interested.
A lot of our members have had the opportunity to see you or see us live, and interact with us live. And a lot of them have said to us, I wish my friends, my family would have that opportunity. This is going to be the greatest show we've ever put on. And this is going to have all of the great opportunities that they're looking for. And if people have friends, family that they wish that they could see you, it starts with this. And where else to go but Nashville? What a fun town to be in, and go down and have some fun and come spend a few days with us as we, like you said, as we rediscover the American founding.
Yeah. I want to remind people it very much is a destination. It's a place to go. It's a great town to visit. There's a lot there, and so make it a vacation. Build a few days in so that you can check out Nashville and the other things, and then that Thursday evening, July 28th, carve out a few hours to be with us at the factory at Franklin. It's just a little bit south of Nashville, and it's going to be a tremendous venue and a tremendous event.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, I there's obviously a lot more we could keep talking about this, and maybe we will at some point. But I think a lot of this plays into the case study this month. So for those chapters who haven't met yet, those people who are still thinking about the case study, I hope this helped a little bit more. And this is what we have to do to continue to guard the idea, the American idea, and guard the ideas of the founding, and to recover, to secure America's future.
Nos somos custodes.